This is a video I've been looking forward to since I started the channel a year ago. And it took me a long time to make it because I wanted to do it right. Tier lists are a contentious topic because there's so many different ways of playing and experiencing the game. So there's 4 different player counts, all that come with their own challenges from the villain. There's 4 difficulty modes, that's skirmish, standard, expert, and heroic. And that's not even counting the mixing and matching that you can do within those modes. That's a lot of different variation there. And different people value different aspects of hero strength differently. Now, there are a lot of great tier lists out there, but they all suffer from the same problem. It's just one perspective. It's static and it can't change. And there's nothing wrong about with that. It's just how the format works. But unfortunately, that means there's no way that the normal way of doing it, of making tier lists, can account for all different ways of playing the game, the personal preferences of each player, and how the game evolves into the future. So the ideal tier list would somehow be able to bring all of these factors together and be dynamically updated in real time, as well as allow every person to customize every aspect of the list to fit their style of play. And I'm happy to announce that that's exactly what I've done. And I'm calling it the living tier list. And I think it's fitting that a living card game would have a living tier list. So here it is. I've been teasing it a little bit, but I created a website for all of you to use, and I'm very happy about it. Let's just scroll through it first. So this is a general power tier list for about 2 player counts. So we can see the S tier here, which is Doctor Strange and Spider-Ham. A tier, we got Cable, Psylocke, Captain America, Miles, Venom. You can see them all here. I don't have to go through all of them. Then we got some B tier heroes here, and C tier, and D tier. And then you can see the scores thing at the very bottom. So as this list is calculated, essentially each hero is assigned a score that they get. And then the tiers are automatically generated by looking at the scores of each heroes, calculating the standard deviation, and then assigning different ranges to the tiers. So I thought about going over all of this list and how I came up with this, but that's not really the main point here. And you'll see why that's not really the main point. If you expand these 2 drop-down menus, you can kind of see behind the hood. And this is also how you'll be able to create your own tier list. So basically every hero in the game, I went through and I assigned stats. Yeah, there's 15 different categories that I rated every single hero in the game in. And then each of these categories, you can assign a weighting factor, meaning how much do you care about this category? How much do you think this matters for hero power? So I created a bunch of different presets for you. So you can see we have 2-player, 3-player, 4-player, solo without rushing, solo with rushing, solo for final bosses with steady or stalwart, beginner-friendly heroes, and custom. So this was my 2-player tier list that I showed you. But then just by changing this to, let's say we want to look at a multiplayer list, we can change it to multiplayer and then expand the list. And then based off the weighting factors I chose for multiplayer, you can see that this updates. So now the S tier includes people like Ironheart, Maria Hill, and Iron Man that are really strong, but they need a little more time to build up. But then late game, they become very powerful. And then, yeah, please explore this on your own. I am very happy with how this turned out. Future Daring Lime in the editing room right now. And I realized I forgot to say that the link to this is going to be in the description. So please check out the link in the description so you can see the site. And I want to show you how the weighting factors change in real time. So let's go back to the weighting factor that I have. And see, this multiplayer consistency boon is a category I created to describe heroes that become better or better in multiplayer specifically. So you can think about like Iron Man and Ironheart. They both need time to stay in alter ego and build their suits, which is much better in multiplayer than it is in solo. So if we decrease this slider, let's say we just drop it, the tier list automatically updates. See, it updates in real time to just be whatever your preferences are. So if we just like say, put this here, move this down, just throw around the sliders, you can see you can make like whatever tier list you want based just off of these factors. That's kind of funny. See, when we don't include any support, since Doctor Strange is good at support, and we're like, we don't want that. Doctor Strange fell out of the S tier, which I think that's kind of funny. So let's go back up to the top here and go back to our preset option of 2-player. And then I wanted to do kind of a case study to describe how all this stuff works. So let's look at Iceman. He's like on the border here between A and B tier. So let's say you look at Iceman, you think that's weird. Like, why is Iceman not higher? Or why is Iceman that high? You can go into the hero stats, search for Iceman, look at him, and then you can see how I rated Iceman across these categories. So he ended up at the bottom of A tier. Let's say that you think I underrated him, and then you look through these categories and you're like, no, I think his minion control's a little bit higher. I think he's a little more reliable than that, a little better at threat removal, and he gets a lot of economy with his resource generator and card draw, so I want to put that up. So we updated Iceman, and now you see if you do that, Iceman ends up all the way at the top. So like, I don't think the Iceman is that strong, but my opinion isn't the whole thing here. I wanted to make this tool so that everyone can see their opinion reflected in a tier list. So if that is your opinion on Iceman, you can see, you can just go change it, and then Iceman will be where you think he should be. And then if you can go through, change all these heroes, but if you decide, maybe Lime was right, you just reset all the heroes to default. And then Iceman will go back to where he was. And another example of how the hero stats could affect it, let's look at Miles. So Miles has some really big strengths. So if we look at Miles in here, Miles has extremely good villain damage, at least in my opinion. But let's say that he doesn't actually have that good of villain damage. So let's say we only put his villain damage at 2. You can see that that lowered him. So he was in here, now he drops a little bit more. Still very good. But let's say that now we only give him a 3 points for that. And let's say we lower his threat removal a little bit. You can see that Miles will just continue dropping as you lower their stats here. So getting these stats the way that you think they are can really help with reflecting the tier list you want to make. So now that we've talked about the 2-player tier list and the multiplayer tier list and how this works, let's take a look at the solo tier list that I made. So let's start with the no rush version. And in solo, at least in my opinion, this is a little bit more accurate to how the weighting function would change. So I think that your economy in solo is more important than it is in multiplayer for a couple of reasons. One, because in solo, you typically need to find a way to stay alive, and you can't necessarily go to alter ego, so a lot of that comes down to allies. So heroes that have higher economy will be able to play more allies, so they'll be able to play an ally plus another event, and that will make them much more powerful. So I value economy more, tempo a little bit more, survivability a little bit more. Also, in solo, stunning and confusing is much more powerful than it is in multiplayer because it cancels entire villain turns, essentially. So that's worth more here. And then I have this multiplayer consistency boon set to negative. So essentially the heroes that get better in multiplayer, now we're accounting for that since they get this bonus for getting better in multiplayer. If it's in solo, they lose that bonus. So that's how that's working out with the way I defined it. And then we end up with this other tier list, the solo no rush tier list. And you can see Doctor Strange is no longer the number 1. Now it's Spider-Ham. Cable shoots up here. Cable's actually an interesting case. So Cable is a perfect example of a character that you may view differently than I do. So when I made this list, I view Cable as being better in solo, and in 4-player, like 3 and 4-player, he hasn't been that impactful in my games because he doesn't really finish the side schemes as fast. But in solo, he can finish like 1 to 2 side schemes or even more a turn, which can really accelerate him. So if we look at Cable and we check his multiplayer consistency stat here, so we'll go to Cable. I valued his multiplayer consistency stat as -4, but let's say that you don't think this is much of a factor at all. So if we put that at 0, Cable will drop out of the S tier in solo, but in the other player accounts, he's going to be much better. So there's kind of a trade-off here. And by playing with these sliders and playing with the hero stats, you'll be able to figure out what you think about them. So essentially, going back to the solo list, let's reset all the heroes to default. This is the S tier, which these characters are very strong because they have a lot of money. And then Cable has all that tempo and economy and power from his side schemes. Psylocke and Doctor Strange and Spider-Ham. Spider-Ham is basically unkillable with his cartoon physics. Doctor Strange just has a lot of tricks up his sleeve. Psylocke can confuse a bunch, which is especially good in solo. Miles kind of for the same reason. He gets stuns, confuses, toughs, has a lot of damage. So yeah, you can see what these heroes are in solo that are very powerful with the way I did the list here. And then if we scroll down to the bottom, you can see heroes I don't think are so good. So these characters, you can see based off the weighting function, how they worked, they don't have these qualities that I was valuing a lot for solos. So for specifically the economy, these heroes tend to take a big hit on economy, which is why they're down here. But now let's go over my solo rush tier list, because that's a significantly different weighting function. So in Rush, you're not really caring about your economy that much because you're just hitting the villain. So what you care about in that mode is going to be your tempo. You want survivability because you don't want to be blocking when you're rushing. So you want to be able to take a hit or two. And then you want a bunch of damage. And then I just said -3 to the late game boon because I want heroes that are not trying to skill into late game. They're strong immediately and then want to just take out the villain. And then when you look at this, we get a Rush tier list with Deadpool, Wolverine, Hulk, Star-Lord, and Miles at the top. And I think that makes a lot of sense to me, at least. And again, if you wanted to change this, let's say that you don't care about survivability when you're rushing, you can see how that changes the list. So now Hulk will drop out of the S tier and Star-Lord will jump up because he the thing keeping Star-Lord below with the way this was calculated was Star-Lord was getting less points than these other characters because he has less tankiness than them. But when you remove that and you say if you say I don't care about tankiness, maybe Star-Lord's the character you want to rush with. So you can really use this to try to choose heroes that you actually want to play for different situations. And then my actual favorite list that I made in here, which I'm really excited to share with you, is my beginner friendly heroes. So this one, I valued economy a little bit because I think it's good for people that are starting out to be able to actually play their cards. Tempo a little bit. Don't worry about card value. A little bit of survivability. Don't worry about how good you are at threat or damage. I want a really reliable character for a new player. Don't really want to be playing late game characters that are scaling into the late game and trying to play all these upgrades. And we want them to be simple. So the simplicity stat that I made is specifically talking about how easy this character is to play. And then stuns and confuses are nice because it can help keep the player alive. So when you do that, you end up with a beginner-friendly hero tier list, which is Captain America, Captain Marvel, Miles, Doctor Strange, Magneto, and Gamora as the S tier picks for that. And I think that's great. These are all great heroes to recommend to new players, in my opinion at least. And if you don't agree with me, of course, you can always change the hero stats or the weighting function to where it matches your opinion on what you value for a new player. And then if we go to the bottom here, you'll see characters that aren't so beginner friendly, which ended up being Adam Warlock and Spectrum, funnily enough, because they came together in a campaign box. I thought that was really funny. Like Iron Man, the SPDR suit, Domino, Drax, War Machine. Yeah, I think this is generally correct that these characters would be much harder for a new player to play. So this I especially like because with the way this list is set up, you don't have to be looking for specifically power. You can be looking for anything you want. You don't have, like, it can just help you choose a character to play. So like, let's say that we're looking for for just like a bruiser tank, like barbarian type build in D&D. Let's set everything to, or actually instead of doing that, let's go to this custom one. I made this for all of you, so you can just make your own. You can change the sliders on any of these, but I thought I'd just put a category in. So if we're making that bruiser character, we're not really looking for economy. They are pretty high tempo. They're survivable. They have good villain damage. Reliable, not so much. They have great minion control. They're not really worried about control. They specifically aren't control, so we could even put that at negative. They're specifically not support, so we can put that at negative. Late game power, doesn't really factor in here. Maybe we want them simple to play. And yeah, and now we have our bruiser tier list that we just made on the fly. And Wolverine, Captain America, Hulk, X-23, Magneto. I think these are all great choices if you're trying to play that kind of style. And you see these characters that weren't doing so well in the lists that were strictly made for power. Now it doesn't matter because you're just looking at the strengths they have. So like Hulk shoots all the way up from D tier to S tier, representing that if you want to have someone that just stays alive, deals damage, and is simple to play, like a barbarian character would be, Hulk is a great choice for that. Also, Thor shot up, She-Hulk shot up, Bishop is super tanky. Yeah, this is I'm really happy with this. Okay, so now I've shown you how to use the list, but now we can go into more of the details on what each of these categories are and how to use this more specifically. So let's start by just setting everything to 0, and we can talk about what each of these categories means. Let's expand the hero stats, and let's take Captain Marvel as an example so we can see. So economy is just talking about how much resources does your character have access to. So if we weight this at 1, you'll be able to see the actual values I did. So since everything else is 0, the only thing this list is checking is what their economy stat is. So if we scroll down now, we can see that this is how I rated them. So like S tier characters on economy would be like Spider-Ham and Bishop. A tier would be all these characters that have a lot of resources available to them. B tier, C tier, D tier. So let's take specific examples for each of these categories. So Spider-Ham is a S tier character in terms of his economy because he can store all those toon counters on him and he kind of breaks the game with his economy. And if we look at a mid-level character on economy, something like let's say we're talking about Thor. So Thor starts out with low hand size, but he actually has an increase to his hand size upgrade, but he has the Asgard card that increases his hand size, along with 2 upgrades that are resource generators, which brings him slightly above average. So he ends up being around the middle in economy to me. He also has an ability that lets him draw 2 cards every once in a while, but he's not as high economy, at least in my opinion, as these S tier characters or these A tier characters. And then if we look at D tier, obviously Hulk poster child for not having any economy. He only has 4 hand size. He has to discard his hand at the end of his turn. It's not great. And then if you look at this bar graph here, you can see the actual numbers. So just because they're in the same tier doesn't necessarily mean that they're the same exact stat. So you can see Rogue and Groot ended up down here, but that's just because they don't really have much going for them. They don't have resource generators really. So they're at 0, but Hulk is actually much below them. So by doing this, you can quickly see how I evaluated each of these tiers and also change the stats. So like, let's say that you think, I don't know, Vision. Let's say because of Vision's resource generator, in your opinion, he should be in A tier. You can see where I evaluated Vision here by looking at this graph. You can see Vision's right here. I assigned him a score of 2 for this. And if you bump him up to 3, then it can go in line. So the way I actually did this was I created all 15 of the stats for all the heroes, and then I had to go back and check because this was a really long process of I did this for every single hero and I tried to justify, at least make sure it made sense to me, why every hero was where they were and was in each category that they were in. And after doing that for every hero across all 15 of these categories, I ended up with the version of the hero stats that I got. So hopefully for you, you can just find the ones that you disagree with me on, maybe like outliers, being like, hey, this wasn't way out of place, and just change that, and then get to your tier list. Because that was a lot of work to get that correct. So that's what I mean by economy in this list. So now let's look at the other categories. Let's start with tempo. So tempo is talking about how quickly this character becomes powerful. So not necessarily till they get to their exact full build with every single card on the table, but how quickly will your character be able to feel like you're strong and even or ahead of the villain? So then if you look at characters that are very good here, Hulk is actually the top character here because, at least in my opinion, you feel pretty much like a full strength Hulk on turn 1. You don't really need any time to build up with Hulk. Similarly with like Star-Lord, just as soon as he gets an element gun, he's already feeling powerful. Wolverine is already feeling powerful. Captain America, great example. I think Captain America is a great example of this because he does build up because he gets those resource generators and he has a good alter ego support, but he still feels very powerful on turn 1. So that's what I'm looking at for this category. And if we look at sort of a mid-tier character on this, let's say Black Panther in the C tier here. Black Panther can search and upgrade at level 1, but he doesn't feel powerful until he gets about 2 to 3 of them, at which point he does feel very powerful. So it takes him a couple turns to get to where he's feeling powerful, which is why he's in the middle. And we'll look at characters that are at the very bottom of this. You get Iron Man because you are not powerful on Iron Man for multiple turns, and in addition to that, you have to stay in Alter Ego to actually build your suit. So it's rough for Iron Man. And then you can see the actual values I assigned to all of these characters by looking at the bar graph here. So now let's look at the card value category. And this is just talking about essentially efficiency of the cards, like how good are your hero cards relative to other hero cards? Like, is your hero getting extra effects on their cards, or is it just really standard? So this is one where I'm not really punishing characters that much. I'm mostly just rewarding them here, but I am subtracting in the cases that we'll see here in a second. So if we look at this, the top characters in this, I think Doctor Strange is a great example. So he has the invocation deck available to him at all times, which has these crazy effects. So he does have to exhaust for them, but still those effects are so powerful that I think they're still great value. So he has the one that lets him draw 3 cards. He gets to exhaust and then switch a characters from being confused to tough. That's a huge deal. His other card does 7. His Bands of Sidorak does 7 damage with a stun. And even if you look at his own hero cards, his attack event, it does 5 damage, but if you get a wild resource, it does 7 damage, stuns, and confuses for 3 cost. So you can see that that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about card value, of like how valuable are these different effects that they're getting. So Doctor Strange is a great example of being amazing at that. And if we go down to C tier, we can see that these characters have a couple issues with their card values. So War Machine, for instance, it's not that his cards are bad on their own, but they struggle a bit in the sense that you have to have the ammo counters, and then they can kind of whiff and then or not get full effectiveness. Same with Rocket. His cards are not all that crazy. So if you compare Rocket's cards to Doctor Strange, you can see the value of Doctor Strange's cards is just a bit higher. And if we look at the very bottom here, yeah, Thor I think is an interesting example here. The last time I played Thor, it was really rough because he has to play his hammer, which is the 1 cost upgrade that gives him +1 attack. But in order to use his hammer throw, which is his main attack event that does 8 damage, you have to return the hammer to your hand. And then if you want to play another one, you have to play the hammer and then play the other one, play it again. So it's extremely expensive for him to do his main attack event that he has a lot of copies of. So yeah, that's an example of just having really, really low value on your cards for the resources you're spending. So now let's look at survivability, which is talking about how tanky is this character. It's specifically talking about how good are they at either blocking damage, having a bunch of hit points, healing. Those are all the kind of things I'm considering here. So Spider-Man Peter Parker and Spider-Ham, both of those characters are essentially unkillable along with Colossus and Deadpool. So Deadpool is literally unkillable minus an unlucky effect in Alter Ego. Colossus has 14 health and can have 2 tough status cards. That's crazy. Spider-Ham can store those upgrades on the field and then only take 1 damage from no matter what source it is. So he can block an attack from Ronan that's hitting for 10. Just turn it into 1. That's crazy. And then he has great recovery as well. Spider-Man has the backflips, 3 defense, goes to Alter Ego, heals all the way up to full health with Aunt May, because that card's absolutely crazy. So you can see these characters are extremely difficult to take out. Whereas the characters down here, I think Hulk's a good example here. He has 18 health, which is a lot. He can get up to 22 with his upgrade, but he doesn't have great ways of healing or blocking damage. Not as much as these characters, at least. So at least in my opinion, I felt like Hulk was a step below these characters on his survivability. But again, if you disagree with me on that, you can always bump Hulk up to the top. And if we look at sort of like a mid-tier character here, Wasp, a great example of a C-tier character in my opinion. She has 11 health, 3 defense, and giant, but nothing else really going. She doesn't have like significant sources of healing or anything like that, which is why she's lower. And if we look at the least survivable characters in the game, these are all the characters that if you get hit on them, it's going to take you a long time to recover from that because you don't have all these great ways of healing. Rocket can heal a little bit, but it's only 1 card in his kit that really does that. So yeah, all these characters struggle with that in my opinion. And you can see the actual values. So these characters aren't exactly the same. I grouped them, they're just grouped together because of the way the tiers are assigned, but you can see their actual values here in the bar graph. Okay, now let's talk about villain damage, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's just how much damage can you do on the villain. So in the way I was defining this in my head, it's like the characters that have the max on this category can essentially one-shot the villains reliably without having to set up. characters that are in like the 4 category, they can, like Captain Marvel, for instance, can reliably one-shot the villain, but they do need to set up in order to do that, and then it just keeps getting a little less from there. So if we take a look at that, uh, Iron Man has a ton of damage in his kit, and I think that's a great example of what I'm talking about here, because I'm not talking about how strong Iron Man is on turn 1, because that's a different category. I'm talking about specifically how much villain damage is in his kit, and he has a lot of villain damage in his kit. So if you lower his villain damage here, but also still keep his tempo and reliability low, then you're kind of double punishing Iron Man for that one thing, which that's something that you need to look out for. You need to make sure that you're not valuing heroes, double counting their bonuses or double counting their weaknesses. So if I was to lower Iron Man's damage here, I'd be double counting his weakness, because when he's built out, there's categories for that, and then he has a bunch of damage in his kit. And Star-Lord has a bunch of villain damage in his kit. Captain Marvel, we already went over that. She has to like get those energy counters built up in order to do it, and if she doesn't have her energy counters set up, she can't really reliably do that. So that's kind of what villain damage is talking about. All these characters up here can pretty much just one-shot the villain. And we go down, Shadowcat, Psylocke, I think these are great examples. They have damage in their kit, but they're not going to be one-shotting the villain. And if we look at the lowest characters on the list, Black Widow, at least in my opinion, not great at doing burst damage to the villain. She has that one attack event that does 6 damage. She has 2 attack, but she's not going to be one-shotting villains outside of some crazy build. And then you can see the actual values I assigned here, as always. And now let's talk about threat removal. This is just talking about how good is your character at removing threat? Do they have good stats? Do they have good events? That type of thing. And this one was surprising to me because I had to completely redo this category, because I did not realize how scarce this actually is in hero kits. Like, this is a thing that heroes are just kind of missing a lot of the time. So if you look at Captain Marvel in the core box, Captain Marvel is the only one that has thwart events, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. I guess She-Hulk has the alter ego one, but just the classic, like, you're in hero form, you pay 2 cost, get a thwart event. Captain Marvel is the only one that had that. And then that became more common later on. So my sense of what was average changed immensely on this as I went through the list. So then if we look at these heroes, I guess Ironheart, a great example. She gets up to three thwart. She has that upgrade that removes threat equal to her version number, and she has thwart events, a bunch of threat removal in this kit. Cable, again, has 2 thwart. He can ready when he defeats a side scheme. He can bump up his stats. His thwart event scales off of how many are in the victory, how many side schemes are in the victory display. Psylocke has 3 thwart on turn 1 if she wants to because of her upgrades. Captain America readies, so you can see that these characters have a lot of threat removal. If we go to a mid-tier example, Black Panther, he has 2 base thwart, which isn't bad. But the only other way he has a thwarting built into his kit is going to be his Tactical Genius upgrade, which is just 1 or 2 threat removal when you play Wakanda Forever, and it's not comparable to the other characters that are above him in the A and S tier on threat removal. And if we look at the worst threat removal characters in the game, Hulk, he has 0 thwart. Colossus, I was surprised, I kind of forgot this, but he doesn't actually have a thwart event in his kit, so that's kind of funny. These characters have less threat removal than the ones above them. Now we're talking about reliability, which is essentially talking about how often are you going to have an unlucky time playing this character. So if you can expect to always have a consistent game, you're not worried about getting unlucky or getting like super countered by whatever villain mechanic, that's an example of a reliable character. And if you can get really unlucky and just completely lose the game because of the way your cards came out of your deck or whatever it is like that, that's an unlucky character. So we got good old Captain America. I think he's a great example of being an extremely reliable character because he starts with a 2/2/2 stat line, he gets up to 3 defense with his shield, and then he has the ability to ready. So like worst case scenario on Captain America, you're like thwarting 2, readying, thwarting 2, which is pretty good. Starting on turn 1, you just have that available to you every single turn. You have good stats, you're not going to get one shot as much, you have good defense, you have healing. Yeah, great example of a reliable character with Captain America. And if we go here, these characters aren't as reliable, but they have in the middle of the list, they have some tools to help them. So Iron Man, for instance, he's not the most reliable character, but he does have tools like the Stark Tower and his futurist ability that can help improve his consistency. And then down here, we have like the Deadpool, Hulks, and Draxes of the world, where Hulk doesn't really have anything helping him, and he actually has things hurting him that he has to discard his card. Deadpool will, depending on the scenario, just die an alter ego, which not very reliable there. Drax has to get attacked 3 times before he gets up to full strength, and if he doesn't see his upgrades, which is also less likely because he has a lower hand size, he can have massive swings in power from game to game. So that's how I evaluated this list here. And now on minion control, which is pretty self-explanatory of just how good is your character at taking out the minions. So if we go to the S tier, I think Black Panther is a great example of this. Black Panther has built-in Retaliate, which is great against minions. 2 attack, that helps with minions. And this Wakanda Forever with his energy daggers gives him multiple instances of damage, so he can have the suit damage, the claws damage, and also the daggers, which you can choose a player and deal 1 or 2 damage to all minions and the villain engaged with that player. So that's crazy amount of minion control from Black Panther. And we go to the middle here, we got like Gamora, which she has 2 attack, and when she thwarts, she gets to ping a damage, so that's helpful, but it's not as crazy as the characters up here, because these characters tend to have like AoE damage against players, all players engaged with that minion, like all minions engaged with the player, like Hawkeye, or like Venom's multi-gun, or War Machine having the card that deals damage to all the minions, and then also having the little minigun that like can remove the counters. Like these characters have just kind of crazy amounts of it. These characters have it, but it's not crazy. And Nova is interesting. He's hard to evaluate, so that's a case where up to you if you want to change Nova, I'd say, because his Unleash the Nova Force is really good, but he doesn't have that available all the time, and sometimes that just whiffs. So that's a difficult example on Nova. And we look at characters that don't have very good minion control. We got Peter Parker and Doctor Strange. And it's not that they don't have the ability to take out minions, it's that they don't have convenient ways of doing it. And characters tend to have convenient ways of taking out minions when you look at the higher parts of the list. So Peter Parker, he can take them out with his Black Cat and his swinging web kick, but he doesn't really want to swing web kick a minion. And then Doctor Strange, he has already in his kit with his cloak. He has an attack event in his invocation deck. Not that it's technically special, but we'll move on from that. But his attack event specifically stuns and confuses. So that's not ideal. You don't really want to be doing that on minions. So like I could definitely see the argument for these two moving up, especially Peter. But yeah, this is up to you. If you want to move those characters up, you have all the power to do that. Now we'll talk about control. So this is considering how good is your character at either status locking the villain so they can't do anything, or canceling all of their effects. So if you're canceling villain activations or canceling encounter cards, that's what I'm talking about for the control boon here. And I say boon because this is something that I'm not punishing characters for not having. I'm just rewarding the characters that do have it. So if we look at the S tier here, we got Doctor Strange and Psylocke. Doctor Strange can just status lock the villain forever in addition to having cancels. His card cancels all the effects of a treachery, including Surge, which is important, and for any player, which is kind of crazy. And he also can look at the cards on top of the encounter deck. So that's crazy control from Doctor Strange. Psylocke essentially can confuse with basically every card in her whole kit, as well as having treachery cancels. So that's crazy. Then we get to the more reasonable levels here with Spider-Man. He has his treachery cancels. He has his webbed up. That's all really good. A tier character, roughly, in my opinion, here. And if we look at sort of mid-tier characters on control, this is a good thing to point out. There's not as much of a distribution here, because if you look at the list here, your character kind of either has it or they don't. So it's not like a distribution that has this like continuous decay or growth throughout it. And if we look at Star-Lord and Thor are interesting. They're kind of special cases of this. With Star-Lord, I was struggling to figure out how I wanted to quantify his ability where he's dealing himself encounter cards. And the way I decided on doing that was by giving him a negative control stat to where he's actually helping the villain get to cards. And that seemed to work out to me when I was looking at it. And yeah, that's how I ended up doing Star-Lord. Now we'll look at the support boon. So this is just, does your character help other people? That's pretty much all it is. Or do your cards just help yourself? And if we look at this, Doctor Strange, another great example of that, but let's not use Doctor Strange for every example here. Let's use Deadpool, because I think this gets overlooked a little bit. Deadpool is actually very helpful for other characters when you look at his kit. He has the Chimichanga truck, which lets players ready after they recover. That's a huge deal. And he also has his exhausting personality to where he can exhaust a character's identity, but then they get to draw cards for each acceleration token, which can be a crazy amount of cards. So Deadpool actually has quite a bit of support in his kit. And then let's look at character. And then again, it's kind of you have it or you don't have it. So like examples in the middle here, like Maria Hill, she can heal people with her Iliad. Captain Marvel can let people draw cards when she's an alter ego, so that's pretty good. And then these characters have I think it pretty much just falls off a cliff. So let's take a look. Yeah. So yeah, there's not that much support going on here for a lot of these characters. This is kind of a rare stat. So the multiplayer characters that are better in multiplayer than in solo, I think tend to have the support boon. Okay, now let's look at unique broken builds. So this one I wanted to include a way for people to quantify and have this be a part of their tier list of like, can this character just do these broken deck builds? But I didn't want it to be the whole point of the tier list, because if you're looking at a tier list for how good is this character at making a broken deck that can just take on any scenario and kind of trivialize the game, I don't think tier lists are that useful at that point. It becomes very, very specific to each character. So that's not what this tier list is. This tier list is based off of the character's cards on their own merit, and you don't have to have a complete card pool for this to be relevant, and you don't have to be amazing at deck building for this to be relevant, or be copying decks off the internet for it to be relevant. It's relevant just based off the characters on their own merits. But what I did do here was, if characters have access to these special traits and or builds that are just kind of unique to them. So for instance, I'm not considering how good is the X character at spamming allies and recurring them with make the call and rapid response and stuff like that, because every character can do that. I'm not considering that. But for instance, let's look at this and it'll make sense. Let's take Spider-Man Peter Parker. Peter Parker has access to not only Genius, but Web Warrior as well. So that's very powerful, having access to Genius and Web Warrior, giving him unique benefits that are not ubiquitous across the character pool. And then Adam Warlock, he has access to all 4 aspects. Doctor Strange has some crazy stuff going on with Mystic is very powerful for all of the Mystic characters. And then Doctor Strange can really kind of break the system with things like pool and card draw and that kind of thing. And then if we look at another example, Maria Hill, I put her in here because she can bring in shield cards from other aspects and use them in ways that other characters can't. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. I didn't weight this heavily into the lists. You can if you want to, but this is just something I included to be there if you wanted to look at it and factor it into the list, but it's not the main point of the list. And then, yeah, most of the characters here just didn't really get a boon here, as you can see. So now let's talk about late game power boon. So the late game power I had to add. Towards the bottom of this list, I kept having to add more levers to actually get this to work, because without these levers, the tier list I wasn't able to weight the tier list in any way that actually made sense. And when that would happen, and I'm like, this character just doesn't work with the way that this is set up, I would add a new category, such as the late game boon, to describe that, and then rate every character across that category again. So if we're looking at late game characters, the S tier here, these are characters that essentially just at a certain point you've won the game. So Ironheart is a great example of that. Of once Ironheart gets to version 3, you've pretty much won the game, even in multiplayer, because she's just that powerful and can do that much. Same with Iron Man. And Maria Hill gets those shield supports going. She has all of those 6-cost shield supports with endless counters. That just gets crazy. So that's an example of characters that do that. And then a little lower, these characters don't like auto win you the game, but they get extremely powerful at the end, more so than other characters in my opinion. And then it falls off because, again, I didn't give everyone a bonus here. This is a small thing to just help out the characters that weren't accurately being represented by the list before I added this. Now let's talk about simplicity, and this is essentially how I made the beginner tier list. It's not about power. It's just about how easy is this character to play and execute their game plan. And you can see these characters are examples of ones that I thought were pretty simple to play, like Captain Marvel and Captain America. And if you go to the bottom, yeah, I don't think any of these characters are simple to play at all. And you can see how I weighted that here. And this is an example where I think you could get a lot of value out of just tweaking this for yourself to create your own tier lists with that. And now the stun and confuse boon, which is just saying how much stuns and confuses does this character have access to. So when you're against steady and stalwart villains, you'll want this to be negative, which is one of the presets that I have, because the characters that have these stuns and confuses against stalwart villains, you're essentially losing a bunch of power from those characters. And also in solo against non-steady and stalwart, you want this to be a little higher because status cards become more and more valuable the lower the player count is, because you're canceling an entire villain's activation and kind of shutting them down entirely. So here are the characters that have a bunch of status cards, and then it pretty much falls off because not every character has a bunch of status cards. So Ant-Man is a good example of like the middle here, because he has his gauntlet, but he doesn't really have anything other than that. So and it's an upgrade, so you're not guaranteed to see it. So you're not going to just be stunning and confusing every game with Ant-Man, but sometimes he can do that. So I put him in the middle here. Captain America has a few stuns. And yeah, and you can see the specific numbers here. And then finally, the multiplayer consistency boon, which is another thing I had to add. I'm looking at you, Cable. You kind of necessitated this for me, but also it ended up being useful for a lot of characters. So these characters get much better in multiplayer in the sense that they have more targets available to them. So, or it helps them with their hero's identity. So Iron Man and Ironheart, they need that time in Alter Ego to build up their suit. And in multiplayer, that becomes much more consistent. Doctor Strange, if you're in solo, you kind of run out of places to put your tough status cards, and you don't have stuns and confuses to flip. So he actually gets better in multiplayer as well. Thor is going to have access to build up his minions or his upgrades a little longer. There'll be more minions for him to engage, so that helps out Thor. War Machine can go to Alter Ego more, build up his counters. That's kind of what it's going on. The characters that get benefits in multiplayer that just aren't present really in solo. And then Cable was the special one here where I had to negatively weight this so that in solo, when I turn this to negative, Cable gets better, and in multiplayer, when this is positive, he gets worse. And again, if you don't agree with that interpretation of Cable, you can always change that for Cable. So now I wanted to talk about another thing about the list. This is another feature I added. Let's say you go through this list and you tweak all of this to be exactly the way that you feel about the game. And that's great. But it would sure suck if you had to do that every time you came to the list. But luckily, I fixed that. So after you update this, so let's choose an example here. Let's go to the custom weighting function. Let's say that we don't care about economy at all. And we just have like some weighting function. And then in this one, Ironheart becomes our S tier hero. And let's take Thor. Let's say Thor, let's put his economy just down so that we make him the top character. There we go. And then we can download these stats. So we can download the weighting settings and download the hero stats. So then when we open a new version of this page and we come back to it, you can see everything's reset, but you can just upload these files back. So we got the hero stats, we can upload that, and the weighting settings, we can update that. And then we're back to this tier list. So we can save it so that you don't have to do this every time. So once you get all your hero stats correct, you can save it. So there's one little issue that I've been working on. I'm working on fixing it, but you can see the weighting function won't let you change it right now. But if you run into that, when you come to this list in the future, it will either be fixed, and if it's not, just exit out of that, and then you can adjust it again. And then the hero stats, we can check. Let's check our boy Thor here. We put his economy at a really goofy number. Yep, put his economy into the negative section like we had last time. And there we go. Yeah, I thought that was really important to allow all of you to save your lists so you didn't have to redo everything when you come back. And notably, the hero stats don't have that same problem that the weighting factors do. So let's say we put Thor back. You can always just do that. and then download the hero stats again, and then you'll have the updated version of those hero stats. So I want to talk again about what the assumptions of this tier list are, because every tier list comes with its own set of assumptions that it's making in its own perspective. And this one, I tried to mitigate that, but it still does have it. So I want to be explicit about what they are. So the first one is that the heroes are considered based on the hero kit itself. And then some heroes I included certain basic cards as part of it, especially if they came with their pack, such as like I was assuming that the Mystic characters had access to the Mystic cards, like Sorcerer Supreme and Spiritual Meditation, that kind of thing. But I'm not assuming they have access to all the different aspect cards that are Mystic locked. And the same for like the 14 HP heroes and higher. I was including them or assuming that they have access to that card pool with cards like Limitless Stamina and stuff like that. But I'm not really doing anything other than that. This list is not about how good is this character at playing this certain deck or this certain build. It's about how good is this character off their own merits. Another thing is that, yeah, going off of that, this list again is not assuming that you're playing the most broken decks that are possible for these characters, because I don't think tier lists are very useful for that, in my opinion, because those are so specific to the build and the character that just putting them all in a tier is not going to be that useful for that. And the benefit of not doing it that way, though, is that this list is going to be relevant regardless of how many expansions you have. So you don't have to have a complete card pool for that, for this list to work for that way, and for this website to be useful for you. And it does. This list also doesn't care about your deck building experience. So whether you're an experienced deck builder or you're brand new to it, it doesn't matter. That's not a factor for this list. And then another thing is that some heroes don't fit well into this list. So think of like Maria, Hill, and Cyclops. They're so tied to the deck build that they just don't really fit. So what I did there was I tried to assume a slightly improved precon deck for them. So Maria Hill, I'm assuming you made a couple adjustments to her precon deck. Cyclops, I'm assuming that you threw in like Utopia and some different X-Men allies from different aspects from your card pool. Because other than that, I don't think those characters make sense if you consider them outside of that, because they're so tied to their deck builds with their alter ego abilities that it just doesn't make sense to consider them outside of that. But I also didn't want to assume Cyclops is using an uncanny, completely optimized uncanny X-Men build either, because every single X-Men character can do that. He can do that better, but that kind of broke the list. So that's another example of if you want to adjust it and see, like, I want to assume Cyclops has that overpowered uncanny X-Men leadership deck for him. You can go in and update his stats to reflect how good he is at those different categories with that deck build, and then save it, and then you have Cyclops for that. And then also, the biggest one here is that this list assumes that you'll adjust it to match what you care about and create your own custom tier list, because that was the whole point of me making this website and going through this whole process, was that I wanted all of you to be able to put the power in your hands and build the tier list that you want that fits your preferences. I think that's about it. Again, I want to emphasize that this is a living tier list. I tried my best to get all of the hero stats and weighting factors correct, but there's a lot of things that can be improved about it, and I'm going to be taking community feedback heavily into consideration for future versions of this. So this will be continued to be updated based off the feedback that you all give me. And I encourage you to subscribe to the channel, comment below, and join the Discord, because then you can communicate with me directly about this. And I want to take your feedback into consideration, so I want to hear from you. And I also just hope you'll enjoy having this website available. There's a lot of work for me to put this together, so I'm just hoping that you all get some benefits out of it. And I want to hear your thoughts. And then finally, I want to give a big thank you to my channel members. The channel members have been channel memberships have been around for a while on my channel, but I didn't have any members, partly because I wasn't advertising it. But I wanted to mention that a few people just joined recently. So thank you to Juno, Marcus, and Kip for joining and supporting the channel. I appreciate it a lot. So until next time, stay zesty, everyone, and peace.